want to thank the brass band for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a round of applause for the Moravian Brass Band? We certainly appreciate them being here with us. It brings back a lot of memories. And we are here to celebrate memories today, ladies and gentlemen, and also to document a momentous occasion for my family, the Hamilton family. I'd like to thank all of y'all. It's my privilege and esteemed honor to welcome you all and thank you all for being here with us today. I think about I-40 and I think about late night road trips. Coming to the Carolinas with Dad at the wheel. And when they built 40, he thought we had reached the future. I mean, truck stops used to be a part of our lifestyle. Coming back and forth across the mountains, we'd stop at Peggy Ann's, and there were many others. We had very good memories. I'm sure Chip and Mary can remember some of these. Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving dinners in a truck stop. They do have turkey and dressing, folks. They also occasionally had fights in the kitchen because people didn't want to be there, but enough of that. I had a speech prepared, and I went back to the room, and the maid had gone through and cleaned my room up, so I'm going to kind of try to just muddle through this the best I can. So bear with me as I do so. As I said, it is a great privilege and an honor. Our family is humbled by the Department of Transportation. Appreciate you being here, gentlemen. The sign that goes up and commemorates my dad. The city of Winston-Salem and the county officials as well. And a very warm feeling in my heart to my brother-in-law, Doug Arcure, for all he's done, and he will stand and share a little bit about this journey. Several gentlemen here to share their experiences with my dad. They're better suited to do so than me in many cases, but my dad always did build bridges. He was a trendsetter. You know, did you know he was a rockabilly before he was a country music star? I mean, he went country when it wasn't cool. You know, Dad was always a step ahead, but he marched to a different drummer, always. I remember as a small child, we'd be playing with the Allman Brothers band in the afternoon, and at night we'd be with the Wilburn Brothers. That's quite a bridge. Daddy was someone who introduced us, and he participated in Tex Ritter's campaign for state senate. He was a cowboy, a singing cowboy, one of the last ones, ladies and gentlemen. I got to meet him as a child, spend time on his tour bus, and you talk about times. My dad and Tex Ritter. And then he'd take Chip and I to the Rolling Stones concert and introduce us to Wolfman Jack. They were personal friends. I'm like, and I saw it, but I didn't realize what I was seeing because it was Daddy. Everybody believes their dad's the greatest, you know, and they are. They are. Everyone's dad is very special. I don't know how many sons get to commemorate their dad in such a fashion, though. He was an enigmatic, iconic figure for so many people. And on the stage with Billy Graham, Reverend Graham's ministry is represented here today, and the first country music singer behind the Iron Curtain. Talk about a wall to come down. He was known for building bridges. And the last statement I'll make before I give up this dais, gentlemen, is, you know, he learned about his love for country music on his granddaddy's knee, listening to the greats on the radio, and his granddaddy was a railroad man. This morning we were doing TV interviews and the train came by and the whistle was blowing, and I knew Daddy was there. It was amazing, amazing. So at this time, I would like to invite Doug Arcure, the chairman of the George Hamilton IV Bridge Project, to step forward and leave this in much more capable hands. Probably their speech stayed with them. But I'm glad you're all here. I want to thank all the friends and family for being here. I got people from all over the country here. I've got close by friends and relatives. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Doug?
Thank you, everyone. I think I'm talking to the family after going through this. I feel like it was more of a vessel to make this happen, because I think it all came from George, and he's the one that really made this happen through me. But anyways, about 18 months ago, while the family was grieving over the loss of George, I felt there should be something special done for this special man, some type of a memorial in his hometown of Winston-Salem. Okay, so where it all began. Some memorial to honor his life, recognize his accomplishments, as a musicianary, as well as ambassador of music. He was ambassador of music all over the world. He was also contributed a lot to the Moravian Church. The idea of naming a bridge or highway came to mind, and this Business 40 bridge near where George is laid to rest, it was the perfect location. At the time, I didn't know the process to go about naming a bridge. So I did a little research, and with the approval from the family, with the approval of the family, I sent an email to the North Carolina Department of Transportation with information about George and asking about the process. And within a few days, I received a very positive response from Mr. Pat Ivey. And Mr. Pat, I just want to say thank you for all your support through this entire process. We started it in March, I think, and finally it was approved in, I think, October of last year, and the signs went up in, I think, in February, March. So really want to especially thank you, the Hamilton family, and I really especially want to thank you for helping us through the process. The Hamilton family and I also want to thank Jake Alexander and the North Carolina Transportation Board, Mr. Dudley Watts and David Plyler of the Forsyth County Commissioners and the Forsyth County Commissioners, Mr. Lee Garrity and the Winston-Salem City Council for passing this resolution for this great memorial. The family and I also want to thank the many who wrote letters in support of this resolution. Representatives from the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, Mr. Maury Scobie, who's with us today, Mr. Franklin Graham, Mr. Ron Shea, Mrs. George Beverly Shea, as well as Mr. Cliff Barrows. Also, Mr. Eddie Ray from the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame, as well as Mrs. Jennifer Furr, the director of the Blue Ridge Music Hall of Fame. Today is a very proud moment for the Hamilton family. What a tribute to have this sign erected in his honor. And on behalf of the Hamilton family and I, we are greatly appreciative to all who have contributed to this befitting memorial for George Hamilton IV. Thank you. I also want to make one comment. Mr. Bill Anderson, I don't know if anybody knows Bill Anderson. He's a Grand Ole Opry member, have been friends with George for over 50 years, and he's a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame. And Bill received an invitation that was sent out. He wasn't able to be with us here today, but I wanted to read something that Bill, and I thought this was profound. It said, as I read the invitation, I couldn't help but think that this might be the most fitting tribute I have ever heard of. A bridge named for a man who built more bridges than anyone in the history of country music. Through his music, his endless worldwide travel, and a relentless dedication to his craft, he built bridges between countries, between peoples, between cultures. Bridges that brought us all closer together and made the world a smaller and more cohesive place. And he paved them all with love, with class, with humility, and with grace. This bridge will serve as a lasting reminder of all he was and all that he stood for. And Bill goes on to say, thank you, Winston-Salem. You definitely got it right. Thank you.
Good morning. Let us pray. Dear Lord, we thank you for this day, for the beauty of the sunshine. We thank you for this place. And we pause to thank you for the life and ministry of George Hamilton IV. We know that in George's life, everywhere he went, he represented you. His goal in life was to spread your love and joy and compassion in the world. And he did it through his music, and he did it through his personality. And we give you thanks that his hometown, Winston-Salem, recognizes that in him and so honors him with the naming of this bridge. May it be a symbol to those who cross that life is about crossing bridges and coming together. And we give you thanks for George's example for all of us. All this we pray in your holy name. Amen.
Well, I came with 35 minutes worth of speech, but Mary Dabney told me I had to cut it. Before I want to go any further with what I need to say about my brother, I think we all ought to recognize his wife, Tinky. She raised 3 kids almost alone there for a while. So, enough of that. My name is Cabot Hamilton, and I happen to be the brother of George Hamilton IV. For a long time, I thought my name was, are you George Hamilton IV's brother? What a nice way to pay a tribute to George today, his 79th birthday. I do want to thank everybody that Doug has thanked, so I won't regroup that. But they asked me to talk a little bit about the Hamiltons in Winston-Salem and a little bit about being a brother of an internationally known music star. Peyton has touched on some of it with what he said. But the Hamiltons as Moravians, you have to go way back in the archives of Old Salem to Horatio Hamilton. He came down here from Hope Community. Interesting. He came down here from the Hope Community area just outside of Winston. And when he died, he was raising his grandson, who for some unforsaken reason decided to move to Ashe County. At that time, Ashe County was known as the Lost Province. Some people think it might still be a bit that. If you want to find George Hamilton I, you're going to have to go to Ashe County. But George, actually our grandparents both grew up in Ashe County, moved down here to go to work for the railroad. So our parents were born here. George and I were born here. George is over in God's Acre, along with our parents and our grandparents. George the First and I, George the Fourth and I were raised in Freeze Memorial Moravian Church, of which there's a member of the band over there with a straw hat on. Just to pass on one other thought, our father, George III, actually ran Goody's headache powders for all of his life in business. It was in Old Salem. Has since been torn down now. George IV, to me, as the brother, had 2 music careers. And believe it or not, he let me travel with him during my high school years. Every summer, I was with him. I was the gopher. I would pick up the guitar and whatever else. But as a result, I got to hang around with Buddy Holly and Eddie Cochran. You just, Frankie Avalon, Connie Francis. I was in heaven, believe me. But in 1956, George recorded A Rose and a Baby Ruth down in Chapel Hill. They sold his contract to ABC Paramount up in Washington, New York area. And that's where he got entangled in what we call the teens, pop culture of the late 50s. And he stayed in that for a number of years. Again, back to Tinky, George and Tinky were married in First Baptist Church right here in Winston-Salem. About 1960, George moved to Nashville. And there he began his country career with RCA Records and with Chet Atkins. Abilene, Break My Mind, such as that. 56 years he had in the country business before he passed away basically 2 years ago. I want to say quickly and kindly in my thought, my life was completely filled in a manner strictly by accident. I happened to be, are you George Hamilton IV's brother? But that alone caused me to have a full life that went well beyond any life I would have expected in Winston-Salem in the late 50s. I got to meet some very great people. Grandfather Mountain up at Hugh Morton up at Grandfather. His daughter's here with us today. I got to meet Arthur Smith. I got to spend some time with Tex Ritter too. It was a beautiful life. He gave it to all of us, and anybody in the family can tell you they were affected very positively. George IV was named the ambassador of country music quite some time ago. But I can tell you also, he was an ambassador to the Moravians of Old Salem. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Tinky, family, friends. My name's Henry Heitman. I'm an old, true friend of George. I'm so happy to be here this morning. It was really a thrill when Tinky called. I wouldn't miss this for the world. We were both active in DeMolay throughout our high school years, and that's probably where I met George and where we became really good friends. In his high school senior yearbook, under George's photo were the words, "Grand Ole Opry, here I come." Boy, did that hit on the nail on the head. In addition to his weekend trips to the Opry, even then he was building bridges. George bridged the gap between athletics and music. George was a member of the tennis team. He tried football, basketball, and in his senior year, he was the manager of the varsity football team. Yep. I remember well escorting Tinky, his sweetheart, out on the field during halftime ceremony. Yep. He must have thought pretty highly of me to trust me with such precious cargo. Then there was his music. There were three of us, Jim Gay, George obviously, Jim Gay, and myself. We were the serenaders in those days. We played all over town. We played civic clubs, we played school events, Key Club Folly type thing. We even played a May Day at Salem College. So, he also had a regular television show on WTOB TV in those days, where he added a steel and an electric guitar to the group. After graduation, we headed to UNC at Chapel Hill, and it didn't take long for George to start performing. This time it was George Hamilton IV and the Country Gentlemen. The gentleman being, hopefully, Joe Tanner on guitar and me on bass. I have to interject at this point that before classes started, George must have spent his summer back and forth to Nashville because he delivered a tape to Chet Atkins. And pretty soon, and Chet Atkins has already been mentioned, he was a fantastic opera star, a great musician, and of course with RCA Records. And so Chet wrote back and said, "I think you have good possibilities as a record seller." Now that must have really encouraged George, and it was really true. During George's first year at Carolina, he kept stopping by to talk to Orville Campbell. whose record was the owner of Colonial Records, and whose claim to fame previously had been Andy Griffith's What It Was Football. So George, over the years, had written a number of original songs, and by March of 1956, George was asked by Mr. Campbell to record a couple of his original songs. I Got a Secret and Sam. The public and DJs raved about George's first recording. So a few months later, Orville received a song from Johnny Loudermilk and asked George to record it. George told the story that he thought it was the worst song he'd ever heard. I don't know whether he was kidding or not, but that's what he said. But the opportunity was great. So George rounded up the country gentlemen, added a drummer, Dennis Beam, to the group, and we fired at it. A Rose and a Baby Ruth was recorded on the evening of June 18, 1956, and the rest is history. Rose was an immediate hit. ABC Paramount joined and released it nationally. It soon became a million seller, which was really hard in those days, I tell you, and earned George his first gold record. By Christmas, he was touring the country with all the rock and roll stars of the day, like Buddy Holly, like Chuck Berry, Bobby Darin, the Everly Brothers. Moving along, I was there when on June 7, 1958, George and Tinky married right here at the First Baptist Church. When, on their third wedding anniversary, my number one son, Matthew Henry Heitman, was born, and George and Tink became his godparents. Excuse me. And when in the 1970s, I woke up one Sunday morning in London to read the headline, George Hamilton appearing in Torquay. So my wife and I grabbed a car, set out to find George. We met George walking down the street in Torquay, outside the theater. Boy, was he surprised, and we were just happy and thrilled. We saw the show, great show, and then had a very nice dinner thereafter. When in the 1990s, I sat beside Tinky at a Billy Graham crusade in Fort Lauderdale with George singing on stage. When in June 2006, we were in Chapel Hill for the 50th anniversary of the recording of Rose and a Baby Ruth. What a thrill that was. I was with George and Tinky, the original team who recorded the record, and many, many friends. When in June 2008, we were here in Old Salem as George and Tink arrived in a horse-drawn carriage at the Old Salem Inn and had a wonderful party. When in February 2010, we were in Nashville for the celebration of George's 50th anniversary as a member of the Grand Ole Opry. For the last 15 years, whenever George was in a few hundred miles of my home in Southwest Florida, we would get together, we'd see his show. On one of his last tours, we invited him to our house for dinner. My wife, Gia, cooked an honest-to-goodness Moravian chicken pie, and George seemed to enjoy it. So at the performance, in front of the whole audience, he says, "Boy, I just had the most delicious Moravian chicken pie." He tosses Gia a Baby Ruth candy bar, and she caught it. Yeah. Over the years, there were always handwritten letters and sending greetings and keeping in touch. He traveled the world. He had many TV shows. He recorded over 100 albums. George was indeed a true friend. From the first day we met to the last meeting, George never changed. He was a gentle, humble, sincere, warm man. I miss him greatly, but true friendship is not about being inseparable. It's about being separated, and nothing changes. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here to help honor the memory of George Hamilton IV, a great human being and a great musician. During an interview that I did with him some years ago, he once said that his career was a hobby that got out of control. And that was George, a guy who was very self-deprecating, very humble about his own accomplishments, and yet very serious about his craft. He always thought that music, I think, had a larger purpose. And that was an idea, I believe, that occurred to him on one of his early package tours with some of the greats in early rock and roll music. He told a story about being on a bus with Sam Cooke, an African-American singing star originally from Mississippi, and the Everly Brothers, who were white and from Kentucky. And the Everly Brothers and Sam Cooke were sitting in the back of the bus together, and Sam Cooke was playing Hank Williams songs on the Everly Brothers guitar. And it occurred to George, I think, in that moment that music is something that reminds us that the things that we have in common go deeper than the things that divide us. It was something that George never forgot. During his time, his more than 50 years on the Grand Ole Opry, during his appearances in the 1960s at the Newport Folk Festival, during his time as a gospel singer when he won a Dove Award and appeared at numerous Billy Graham crusades, and back in the 1970s when he became known as the International Ambassador of Country Music. He was the first country musician to play behind the Iron Curtain, and he gave a talk at Moscow State University reminding people of the history of music and how it's always been something that helps tear down walls and build bridges, and he did that quite consciously for his whole life and his whole career. One of my favorite stories about George was one that happened late in his life at a small church in Nebraska. He was doing a gospel concert there, and before the concert, he heard people saying what he thought was some very harsh things about recent immigrants who had come to the United States. And it wasn't so much that George had thoughts that he wanted to share about the official immigration policy of the country, but there was just a little bit of harshness that I think offended his gentle soul and gentle spirit. And so in the concert that night, he sang a song by his friend Guy Clark called Immigrant Eyes, which was about how hard it is to come to America and what promise awaits those who make the effort and make that trip. And then he looked out at the crowd and he said, I think we're all immigrants in some way, aren't we? And it was a kind of gentle reproach that he was very good at. He was a person who reminded all of us that we can be better than we think we can be. He did it with his music, he did it with his example, and I miss him a lot. Thank you.
I am a classic behind-the-scenes person in the Graham organization, so this is kind of a stretch for me. So when Tink, actually I was going to say when Henry, alrighty, Henry mentioned that when Tink called him, he was thrilled. Actually, when Tink called me, I about collapsed because this is so different. So anyway, if I do actually keel over, make her come up here and read my notes. But in 1984, Reverend Billy Graham and his entire team were pleased to meet George IV during our Mission England meetings in Sheffield, Ipswich, and Norwich. He charmed the British audiences everywhere we went. He was with us on quite a few other crusade cities in Europe as well as here in the United States. Since 1967, he had been a regular visitor to the United Kingdom, so it seemed a naturally good idea to bring one of our North Carolina neighbors back to the country where he was so popular. While we knew of his travels throughout the United States, it was fascinating to find out that his presence in Europe and the United Kingdom was way beyond anything we could have imagined. walking in and out of the crusade meetings, we almost needed to lay on extra security for all of his fans wanting pictures and autographs. He grew up in a Moravian household with his father and mother and brother Cabot, who just spoke. They were both devout Christians and brought their children to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, and every Wednesday night prayer meeting. George remembered as a boy when his mother put the white polish on his Sunday shoes. She would do that on Saturday night. He often would say that at the age of 12, he went forward at the close of a church service to receive Christ as his Lord and Savior. It was not a social thing or a ritual. He said that he meant it, and that he was full of love for the Lord. Being associated with the Moravian Church, George IV visited Jamaica and Africa, participating in a documentary on the Moravian Church. UNC Public Television also produced a documentary about the Moravian Christmas in Winston-Salem, with George hosting it, and I believe it still airs every year. As years passed, he spent more and more time recording and performing his own brand of country gospel songs. In later years, he classified himself as a musicianary. He had a genuine love of the old-fashioned hymns because it uplifts and inspires and is the kind of music that will outlive this generation. He felt that these songs span the years to bring a much-needed message of comfort, cheer, and hope amid the dark, despairing seasons of life. He once said, "It encouraged me to use my platform as a country singer and Grand Ole Opry member to make more effort to communicate what I believed." His abiding and deeply held Christian faith was the bedrock of his belief in civil rights and racial equality. He recorded and released 36 country gospel albums. The final recording was a gospel duets album with his son George V. And as you know, there is a George Hamilton VI, and I am sure that there will be the 7th in due time. From the 1980s onward, he conducted annual solo concert tours of churches throughout America, Canada, Great Britain, Ireland, and Holland. He even toured all across India with Reverend Billy Graham's associate evangelist, Dr. Robert Coonville. Cliff Barrows said that Mr. Graham's longtime friend and head of music for the Graham organization said that George's life was dedicated to gain people to the other side spiritually, bridging them from darkness to light. George, in continuing with what Cliff Barrows said, George was continually building bridges through the way he sang and through the spirit he exhibited. In closing, actually I took 30 minutes and tried to reduce it to 26, but Mary was saying, say what I wanted to. But the last time I saw George and his dear wife Tink, who actually I should have already mentioned in my remarks, she's undoubtedly the great woman behind the great man. I also have heard it said that women on their knees in prayer keep men on their feet. But my notes are out of order. They were always so nice as they were coming on I-40 back and forth from Winston-Salem to stop at the Black Mountain exit at Huddle House for coffee and raisin toast. And so on this particular occasion, it actually was right after Arthur Smith's funeral, and we had gone down for that, some of us, and he did an outstanding job. And so they called, and Mrs. George Beverly Shea, our longtime gospel singer, and I went to meet him at Huddle House. And as we were hugging both of them goodbye, He lifted the tailgate of his station wagon to give us his newest CD. He was always so thoughtful and very generous in every aspect of his life. May God continue to bless his family and enable them to continue his legacy of love and appreciation and thoughtfulness and generosity. And a final thought. One more way we can honor George Hamilton IV is every time we cross this bridge, we will keep it under the speed limit. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jake Alexander. I'm a member of the North Carolina Board of Transportation, and on behalf of the board and Governor Pat McCrory, I'd like to read the resolution we bring forth today for George Hamilton IV. Whereas George Hamilton IV was born in Winston-Salem and raised in the Moravian Church, graduated from R.J. Reynolds High School and attended UNC Chapel Hill. While a student there, he recorded the teen pop ballad A Rose and a Baby Ruth for Chapel Hill's Colonial Records. The recording became so popular on the radio that it was bought by ABC Paramount Records for national distribution and radio promotion, becoming ABC Paramount's first million-selling hit record. And whereas George Hamilton IV was soon invited to move to Washington, D.C. to become a member of the cast of the Jimmy Dean TV show, where he performed regularly with Jimmy Dean and Patsy Cline. He also appeared on Dick Clark's American Bandstand, excuse me, Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts, The Perry Como Show, and hosted his own national television musical variety shows on both CBS and ABC TV in the 1950s. And whereas in 1959, Mr. Hamilton made history by becoming the first pop singer to, quote, go country, unquote, he moved his family to Nashville, Tennessee, where he recorded the country hit Before This Day Ends and his signature country and pop hit, Abilene. And whereas in 1972, Mr. Hamilton and his family moved back to North Carolina, and in 1974 he became the first country music performer to go beyond the Iron Curtain, where he gave a lecture concert at Moscow University and headlined sold-out concerts in Prague and Czechoslovakia. For all of his international achievements in promoting American country music globally, Billboard magazine gave Mr. Hamilton the title the International Ambassador of Country Music. And whereas Mr. Hamilton became a member of the Grand Ole Opry, where he performed regularly for 54 years, his final performance there was September 6th, 2014. He passed away on September 17th, 2014. He recorded over 100 albums during his 58-year music career. And throughout his career, he always claimed Winston-Salem as his hometown. And whereas the mayor and city council of Winston-Salem and the Forsyth County Board of County Commissioners request to name the US 421 Business 40 Bridge over Salem Avenue and Research Parkway in honor of George Hamilton IV, now therefore be it resolved that the North Carolina Board of Transportation name the US 421 Business 40 Bridge over Salem Avenue and Research Parkway as the George Hamilton IV Bridge, that appropriate signs be erected at a suitable time, adopted this the 8th day of October 2015 by the North Carolina Board of Transportation. As Maury just said, behind many great men is usually a great woman. So Mrs. Adelaide Tink Hamilton, will you join me for the presentation of the resolution?
Thank you.
And now if Mrs. Hamilton, along with all the Hamilton family, will join us for the unveiling of the sign.
My name is George Hamilton V, and believe it or not, this is George Hamilton VI. I want to remind you all, if you would, please join us tonight on the square in beautiful downtown Old Salem for the Folksy Music Festival. Absolutely free, and it's from 6 to 9:30, celebrating the music that George IV grew up on here in Winston-Salem and Old Salem, and bluegrass and country and acoustic music, and some gospel music, and the Moravian band also a Moravian bluegrass band. So please come out tonight and celebrate with us George Hamilton IV's birthday at the George Hamilton IV Folksy Music Festival. As Maury mentioned, the last album that my father recorded was the one that featured George VI and me. And we sang a song, I love emotion. We sang Abilene. So today, since it's very hot, we're gonna sing the chorus of Abilene with everybody here in the audience. Are you ready to sing along? Help me through this. Put your hands together. All right. And pray. All right, you ready, George VI? I'm gonna put it over here.
All right.
All right, come closer. That's the key of G. Abilene, Abilene, prettiest town that I've ever seen. Women there, they don't treat you mean in Abilene, my Abilene. Now, we were going to sing all the verses, but now we want you all to sing the chorus with us. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Abilene, Abilene, prettiest town that I've ever seen. Women there, they don't treat you mean in Abilene, my Abilene. Women there, they don't treat you mean in Abilene, my Abilene. Because I love being on stage, I thought I'd stay up and sing an excerpt of another song. Now, this is a song that we actually recorded with George IV and all of his grandkids, and they could come up and stand around too if they want to, or you can also sing out there in the comfort of your chair a little chorus of a song that he loved, and my mother even sang along on this recording on the 50th anniversary CD he put together. A song called You Are My Sunshine. Do you know the chorus? All right, so now we're going to try to get you all to sing along on the chorus, and it goes in the key of D. Before we do this, I don't know, is John Rayleigh out there? John Rayleigh may be gone, I guess. But if you didn't get a chance to read the Sunday Winston-Salem Journal, you've got to. The article about John Rayleigh, really, it was just phenomenal. Put it all in perspective and just made the family so happy. And so many people have written and said, wow, amazing. So thank you, John, for that poetry. We'd also like to say hello to Ed over there. I think you sweat more than anybody else today. That's our cousin, Ed Petrie. All right. And now we'll all sweat to You Are My Sunshine. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Everybody sing along with Make Our Cure. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Tag ending. Please don't take my sunshine away. Enjoy the sunshine. Happy birthday, George IV.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, on behalf of the Hamilton family and everyone up here joining me at the dais, I'd like to thank you all for being here in this heat today. I'd like to say a special thank you to my sister, Mary Arcure, for sharing her husband with us as he orchestrated all this. Mary is behind the scenes. We love her very dearly, and she does a lot to keep this family motivated, inspired, and keeping on track. Sometimes not always focused, but on track. Mary, I love you. And Aubrey and Mick are both here with us. Aubrey, you didn't make it up on stage. She usually steals the stage, so you're probably lucky about that, folks. But Aubrey, it's good to have you and Mick here with us. Thank you both, Aubrey and Mick Arcure, my entire family, my wife, Ann, my son, Mac, Nancy. I can go on and on and on. My family's here, Aunt Patsy, Aunt Nancy, and her entire family. I love you all very much. Got a lot of friends here. See Harris here from Grandfather Mountain, Catherine earlier, as we mentioned. So many friends, I can't mention them all, and I won't bore you with me trying. But I would like to leave you with one of my dad's favorite benedictions. He used to always like to wind up and say, "May you stay forever young and always have good health. May you live to hear your song sung by George Hamilton the 12th." Thank you all for being here.